Hi everyone. So today I'm going to read chapters 3 and chapters 4 of Nightjohn, and I then will go over some of the key points at the very end of my readings. Before I get started on that though, I just kind of want to recap chapters 1 and chapters 2. Remember, we met Sarni, who is the little girl on the plantation. She's 12 years old. We also met Mammy. Mammy is the one who is taking care of her. It's not her actual mother, but she is the one that's kind of taking care of her whole life because her mother was taken away. They work and live on this plantation, and they don't know how to read. They don't know how to write. Sarni likes to think very deeply about everything, and she tries to remember as much as she can, and that's her way of learning and about the world. The only thing she really can't remember is her birth mother. She also overhears that they are going to be getting a new slave hand, and this slave hand is going to cost $1,000. And they did give the name right at the end of chapter 2, and the slave is going to be named Nightjohn. Now, just to kind of recap, spending $1,000 on a slave is a lot of money back then. A lot of money. So we're going to find out why he is really worth so much money. Hopefully by the end of this readings, you should be able to answer both the discussion question and write a diary entry on Mammy, which are both found on Canvas. If you have any questions at all after this whole thing is done, make sure you email me and I can point you in the right direction and give you any help that you need. So, without further ado, here is chapter 3 of Nightjohn. Old Waller brought him in bad. Sometimes they come in not so bad. Speculators bring them to sell sometimes, all in a wagon. Sell them from the wagon, and Waller, he buys them, one or two or whatever, right from the wagon. Sometimes Waller, he goes for to buy them at some other place, and brings them home in the wagon, sitting in the back. Old Waller on the seat with a pistol in his belt, sitting like he thinks he is big. Other places, near here, other places have what they call overseers to use the whip and to use the gun and go get 'em. But not here. Waller, he loves to carry the whip and carry the gun, and so he rides in the wagon, his own self, and makes on to be big, sitting there like he don't know we hate him. But he can bring them in good or he can bring them in bad, and with Nightjohn, he brought him in bad. Not in the wagon. He was walking, all alone in front of the horse. Waller, riding the big brown horse in back, had a rope down and over to a shackle on Nightjohn's neck, rope tied to the saddle. So when the horse stopped, Nightjohn, he stopped, jerked on his neck. Waller, he brought Nightjohn into the main yard near the quarters out in the open, yelling and swearing at him, yanking on the rope. Nightjohn, he didn't have any clothes on, stood naked in the sun. I was by the quarters, carrying water to wash the eating trough before it was time for the evening feeding, and I saw them, standing in the sun with the rope going from his neck up to the saddle, tired and sweating because Waller ran him, dust all over him, flies around his shoulders. His back was all over scars from old whippings. The skin across his shoulders and down was raised in ripples, thick as my hand, up and down his back and onto his rear end and down his legs some. I wondered why he was bought with all the marks. When they be marked that way, people don't buy them because it means they hard to work, hard to get to work. But he did. Waller, he brought Nightjohn home and ran him naked till he sweated, and the biting flies took at him, and I was there and saw him come in. I'm brown, same as dark sassafras tea, but I had seen black people, true black, and Nightjohn was that way. Beautiful. So black he was like the marble stone by the front of the White House. So black it seemed I could see inside, down into him, see almost through him somehow. In a little, Waller, he untied the rope. Then he cracked the whip once or twice like he'd be a big man and drives Nightjohn past the quarters and out to the field to work. Didn't matter that he'd been run or might be thirsty. He didn't stop at the pump. but ran him right on through and out to the fields, naked as he was born, to get to hoeing. He come in bad, and it wasn't until late that night, after dark in the quarters, that I learned his name. Mammy, she made canvas pants for the new men when they came, sewed them from the roll of tarp cloth we used for all our clothes. She gave a pair to Nightjohn when they came in from the field, but he didn't have time to say nothin', because it was time for the evening food. 2 times a day at the wooden trough. That's how we eat. Mornings they pour buttermilk down the trough, and we dip cornbread in it, and sometimes pieces of pork fat. We take turns on a calabash gourd for a dipper to get all the milk out, except the little ones don't always get much of a turn, and have to lick the bottom of the trough when it's done. For midday meal, the field hands, men and women both, unless the woman is a breeder in her last month, then she can work the yard, each carry a piece of cornbread and pork fat, or meat with them. When the sun is high overhead, they stop long enough to stand and eat the bread and fat. They don't get to sit or rest. Even do they have to do their business. They dig a hole with their hoe and do it standing and cover it with dirt and get back to work. Don't they do this? Don't they do it right? Don't they keep standing and work even to eat and do their business? Don't they do it all just exactly right? The whip comes down on them. Old Waller, he don't have overseers, but they's 2 men he calls drivers. They have whips and clubs, and they use them. Then at night, when it's just dark, they come in from the fields. During the day, Mammy and the breeders that can still walk and the small ones that can't keep up to work in the fields yet make food. We cook in the big pot Mammy used for praying. We cook pork fat and vegetables from the garden and make skillet cornbread. When the field people come in at night, we pour from the pot in the trough, and everybody passes the gourd and eats with their hands and dips cornbread into the juice till it's gone. Then the young ones get to lick the trough, and we go into the quarters for the night. There ain't no light allowed in the quarters. Time was, Mammy said, when she had a small bowl and made a lamp with a piece of cotton and melted pork fat. But up to the White House, they saw the light and made her put it out. Kept the workers awake, they said. Course, we be awake anyway, if we want to. Just be awake in the dark. Light comes through the open door, and there are 4 small windows down the back wall. If there's a moon, there be good light. Light enough to see faces and talk, and even if there isn't a moon, enough comes from the stars and the lights from the White House to let us see a little. Those to work in the field are always tired, always caved in with work, and there ain't never enough to eat, so they be hungry too. They usually go to sleep as soon as they hit the corn shuck pallets on the floor. But the first night when the new man was there, you could tell it was going to be different. He didn't even get on the floor, but went right over to the corner where Mammy put the pot to pray sometimes and sat there. The new canvas pants were so stiff I could hear them crackle and bend when he sat back against the wall. I was on the side of Mammy's shuck mattress, along with about 6 young ones who were all kicking and scratching, so sleep wasn't coming, and I hear, "Who's got tobacco? I need some tobacco." It was a whisper, but loud, cutting from the corner where the new man sat. I had me some tobacco. It was just shredded bottom leaf that I'd been chewing to spit on the roses, but I'd kept some back in a wrapped piece of sacking inside my shirt dress, tied round my waist on a piece of string. I didn't say a word. You come on those things to keep, and you keep them to trade for other things you need, like pork fat or pennies. He chuckled, low and rippling. Sounded like a low wind through willows, that small laugh, or maybe water moving around round rocks, deep and soft. "I'll trade," he whispered. "I'll trade something for a lip of tobacco." I thought, what you got to trade? You come in naked as the day you was born. Come in bad with whip marks all up and down your back, not even a set of clothes or canvas pants, and you're ready to go to trading? I didn't say it, but I thought it, and he liked to read my thoughts. What I got to trade? What I gotta trade for a lip of tobacco is letters. I knows letters. I'll trade A, B, and C for a lip of chew. He laughed again. And there I was, with the tobacco in my shirt dress. And he said that, and I didn't know what letters was, nor what they meant. But I thought it might be something I wanted to know, to learn. So Mammy, she was sleeping, her breath moving in and out, and I wiggled out of the pile of young ones and moved to the dark corner and set my own self next to him. What's a letter? He smiled. You sound like you've got tobacco. Not until I know what a letter is. Why, it's reading. You learn the letters first, and then when you know them, you string them together into words. I'll trade you 3 letters for a lipful. I knew about reading. It was something that the people in the White House did from paper. They could read words on paper. But we weren't allowed to be reading. We weren't allowed to understand or read nothing, but once I saw some funny lines on the side of a feed sack. It said, 100 pounds. I wrote them down in the dirt with a stick, and Mammy gave me a smack on the back of the head that like to drove me into the ground. Don't you take to that. Take to writing, she said. I wasn't doing it. I was just copying something I saw in a feed sack. Don't. They catch you doing that, and they think you'll learn it to read. You learn to read, and they'll whip you till your skin hangs like torn rags, or cut your thumb off. Stay away from writing and reading. So I did. But I remembered how it had looked, the drawings on the sack and in the dirt, and it still puzzled me. I dug in my dress and found the tobacco, but held it. You saying you can read? He nodded. I give you something to read, you can read it just like that? I can. There was some yellow light from the windows of the big house, and it came through the doorway and made a light patch on the dirt floor. Come on. I led him to the light patch and squatted. I used my finger to scratch what I remembered in the dirt. The floor was hard packed, and I had to rub hard to make it show right. There. He squatted and squinted. Why, those ain't letters, those are numbers. Numbers? He nodded. Sure is, says 100. Then there's those 3 letters on the end. They don't work for me as a word, just LBS. Don't say a word. It must mean something to somebody. Can you teach me that? To read? To read what I just put there in the dirt. Can you teach me? He rubbed his chin. Well, might be if I had some tobacco. I dug the sack out of my shirt dress and gave him a pinch. He put it in the side of his mouth. Way it works, he said, is you gotta learn all the letters and numbers before you can learn to read. You gotta learn the alphabet. Alphabet? He nodded. There'd be lots of letters, and each one means something different. You gotta learn each one. Those 3 he said back in the dark corner. Can you teach me those? I sure can. He used the edge of his hand to rub out what I had written in the dirt. Then he made a drawing with his thumb. A. Tonight we just do A. He sat back on his heels and pointed. There it be. I looked at it, wondered how it stood. Where's the bottom to it? There. It stands on 2 feet, just like you. What does it mean? It means A, just like I said. It's the first letter in the alphabet. And when you see it, you make a sound like this. A or ah. That's reading. To make that sound, he nodded. When you see that letter on paper or a sack in the dirt, you make one of those sounds. That's reading. Well, that ain't hard at all. He laughed, that same low roll. Made me think of thunder long ways off, moving in a summer sky. There's more to it. Other letters. But that's it. Why they be cutting our thumbs off if we learn to read? If that's all it is? 'Cause to know things, for us to know things, is bad for them. We get to wanting, and when we get to wanting, it's bad for them. They thinks we want what they got. I thought of what they had. Fine clothes and food. I heard one of the houseworkers say they ate off plates and had forks and spoons and knives and wiped their mouths like they wiped their butts. That's true. I want it. That's why they don't want us reading, he sighed. I got to rest now. They run me 10 miles in a day and worked me into the ground. I need some sleep." He moved back to the corner and settled down, and I curled up to Mammy in amongst the young ones again. I thought. Ah, there it is. I be reading. "Hey there in the corner," I whispered. "What? What's your name?" "I be John." "I be Sarny." "Go to sleep, Sarny." But I didn't. I snuggled into Mammy and pulled a couple of the young ones in for heat and kept my eyes open so I wouldn't sleep and thought. Chapter 4. Come a hard time then. Come a awful hard time. There be a girl before then named Alice. She slept in the other end of the quarters, and as soon as she got big she went to work in the fields pickin' and hoein'. But she was addled in the head, off dreamin' sometimes, and Mammy said one day that they would sell her. But her body was all right, and they in the White House decided she'd be a good breeder, so they set her for that. She didn't take well to it and fought, and they tied her to make it happen in the breeding shed back of the quarters. But it went bad on her head and her thinking. When it was done, she was worse than before. She wandered in the yard, and sometimes even went up to the White House. Except for the house servants and gardening, we weren't allowed to the White House. And when the master one day caught Alice, he took her to the wall of the spring house. The spring house was where we got drinking water. It was made of stone and with heavy walls. They had rings of iron to be made in the walls many years past, big rings of iron with chains and shackles, and they put Alice there and tore her clothes off. Then the master, he whipped her his own self with a raw hide, whip cut from an old gin belt used on the cotton gin. Sometimes he doesn't whip and makes a field hand do it and stands with his pistol in his belt and smiles. But sometimes he likes to take the whip, and this time he whipped her until her back was all ripped and bleeding. We had to watch. Every time there was somebody to be on the wall of the spring house and be whipped or other punishments, we all had to watch. When it was done and she had screamed until she sounded like pigs being cut, he made Mammy to go to the salt house and get salt and rub it in the cuts to make more pain. I never heard a sound like that. I'd seen men whipped, but never that kind of sound, cutting like that, high and higher until it whistled in my ears. Then he left her to hang there until the next day. The flies, they came, and Mammy went out and covered her back with a cloth and kept some of them off so they wouldn't make maggots in the cuts. Next morning they took her down. They was some maggot eggs, but not so bad. I helped Mammy clean Alice. We took her in the quarters, and Mammy, she rubbed grease on Alice's back, and I sat and held her hands because she kept trying to reach around and push Mammy's hand away. All the time she don't say anything, not a thing, not even the silly things she used to say, and when we were done she lay on the floor in the corner like she was broken inside. Mammy made her some root tea that smelled of bark, but Alice wouldn't drink it. She just lay there all that night and the next 3-4 days. During that time, John came, and I talked to him about traded tobacco with him. For 2 nights he didn't do no work on the trade and went to sleep right after the trough because the master worked him so hard. On the 3rd night after I traded for sometime that same night, Alice ran. My life is short, but some live long, and the one thing we know, short or long, it's wrong to run. Not wrong because it's wrong, but wrong because nobody ever gets away. I've seen 2 to try it, both men. One was an old man named Jim who just couldn't take no more, and one night he up and cut. They set after him the next morning with dogs, only the master. He don't only go his own self, but took 5 or 6 field hands with him to see, so they can carry what they see back to tell us. The dogs be mean. He feeds them things to make them mean, blood things. Sometimes he'll take them to the fields, and should a man or woman work a little behind the others or behind the best man who is whipped to speed, why, he sets the dogs on the slow one. And he don't pull them off right away neither. Lets them go until they taste blood and want more of it. They's mean, the dogs. They's big and red with tight hair and heads like hogs and mean as Waller his own self. He keeps them in a stone pen by the side of the horse barn, and they slobber and chew at the gate each time we walk by. Dirt mean. Jim, he ran at night too, but it didn't help. The field hands told us later. He cut and ran down to the river, ran in the water for a goodly distance, then on the top of a fence rail for as long as the fence ran, and then dropped to the ground and just moved. The dogs followed him all the way. The hand said that one dog even got up and ran on the top rail of the fence. Only took half a day and they caught Jim. The last bit, when he heard the dogs singing him, baying on him, Jim climbed a tree. Problem was, the tree wasn't higher than he could reach. Nearly, and as high as he got, the bottom of him hung down where the dogs could reach him. The master set the dogs on him, and they tore and ripped what they could reach, until there wasn't any meat on Jim's legs or bottom. The dogs ripped it all off to hang in shreds. The field hands say he still didn't let go, nor never did. Even when he was dead, his hands didn't let go, and the master made the field hands leave him there. They some wanted to take Jim down and bury him, but he made them to leave him that way, hanging by his hands in the tree for the birds to eat. Second man was young, name of Polly. He wasn't a big enough hand to be allowed to be a breeder in the quarters, and so he went to lookin'. He snuck away and met a girl at a plantation down the road a piece, and they sat in the moonlight with each other some nights. Polly, he made it back before wake-up time every night, but one, the last one. He fell asleep in his girl's arms, fell asleep in the moonlight. So they from the White House set out with the dogs, and Polly, he didn't run or try to get away. He was on his way home, but they let the dogs to have him anyway, tear him up to bleed, but not kill him. Then the master, he tied him down and cut him like he did the cattle, so he wouldn't run to girls no more. But the cut went wrong, and Polly, he laid all night and bled to death, without ever making a sound in the corner of the quarters. So don't nobody run. Besides, I don't think there's a place to run to. I heard talk once of some land north, but it's far away, and it was only talk. Not something to know, just something to hear, like birds singing. The talk of the land north, or the wind in the trees. But Alice cut and run that night. She didn't get far, down to the river and then sideways some. Her back was still ripped and sore, and she must have moved slow. She might have kept moving all night, but hadn't gone more than to the other end of the cotton fields, an easy small walk. Then she pulled herself under some brambles and was there when they found her. He let the dogs to have her. Didn't matter what she'd gone through, or that her thinkin' wasn't workin' right. The field hands with him told us he smiled his big white smile, like the big white house, pale maggot white, like his skin smile, and let the dogs to have her. She didn't fight them or try to get away, and they just tore at her until her whole front was torn and gone, and she was bleeding from the chest. She didn't die. Alice be too tough for her own self-good. She didn't die, and he made the hands to carry her back and put her in the quarters. Mammy sewed up what she could with canvas thread, and greased and patched, and she lived. She be like Polly. She didn't make sounds, even while Mammy was pulling at the torn flaps of skin and sewing them on her chest. Not a sound, just stared and stared at the wall. That night, John called to me as he came past where I was trying to sleep. "Tobacco, girl? Time for another letter." I had been all day helping Mammy and was tired and sad for Alice. How she'd be at the other end of the quarters. But I went just the same. I still had 2 letters coming for that first pinch of tobacco. He was sitting on his heels in the open doorway. I squatted next to him. "What's the next one?" He used a stick with a sharpened end on it and wiggled in the dirt 2 half circles. "B. B," he said. "It be B." "That sounds crazy." "That's how you say the letter. B. It's for bay, or B or buh or boo. That's how a bee looks and how you make the sound. I made it sound in my mouth, whispering. So where's the bottom to it? I swear, you always want to know the bottom to things. Here it is. It sits on itself this way, facing so the two round places push to the front. Suddenly, he's gone. 1 second he's there, the next he slams sideways and gone. What in the hell are you doing to her? Mammy was standing there, big and black and tall in the moonlight. What you doing to this girl? She had come from the side and fetched John such a blow on his head that it knocked him back into the wall and on his back. He come up quick and didn't cower none. Nothing. Not like you think. I'm teaching her to read. That's what I mean, Mammy said. What in the hell are you doing? Don't you know what they do to her if they find her trying to read? We already got one girl torn to pieces by the whip and the dogs. We don't need two. I'd been quiet all this time, watching. Didn't seem so bad what he was doing. Teaching me a few letters to know, maybe a word or two. So I said it. Doesn't seem so bad. Bad? Then she hissed like a snake. Child, they'll cut your thumbs off if you learn to read. They'll whip you until your back looks knitted, until it looks like his back. She pointed to John, big old finger. Is that how you got whipped? He shook his head. I ran. And got caught. Not the first time. She waited. I waited. First time I ran, I got clean away. I went north, all the way. I was free. I never heard such a thing. We couldn't even talk about being free. And here was a man said he had been free by running north. I thought, how can that be? You ran and got away? Mammy asked. I did. You ran until you were clean away? I did. And you came back? I did. Why? He sighed, and it sounded like his voice, like his laugh, low and way off thunder. It made me think he was going to promise something, the way thunder promises rain. For this. What you mean this? To teach reading. It's never quiet in the quarters. During the day, the young ones run and scrabble and fight or cry, and they's always a gaggle of them. At night, everybody be sleepin', but not quiet. Alice, she's quiet, but they's some of them to cry. New workers who are just old enough to be working in the fields cry sometimes in their sleep. They hurt and their hands bleed and pain them from new blisters that break and break again. Old workers cry because they're old and getting to the end and have old pain. Same pain, young and old. Some snore, others just breathe loud. It's a long building and dark except for the light coming in the door and the small windows, but it's never quiet, not even at night. Now it seemed quiet. Mammy, she looked down at John, didn't say nothing for a long time, just looked. I had to think to hear the breathing, night sounds. Finally, Mammy talks. Her voice is soft. You came back to teach reading? John nodded. That's half of it. What's the other half? Writing, he smiled. Of course, I wasn't going to get caught. I had in mind moving around, teaching a little here, a little there, going to do high schools. But I got slow, and they got fast, and some crackers caught me in the woods. They were hunting bear, but the dogs came on me instead, and I took to a tree, and they got me. Another long quiet. Way off down by the river, I heard the sound of a night bird singing for day. Soon the sun would come. Why does it matter? Mammy leaned against the wall. She had one hand on the logs, one on her cheek. Tired. Why do that to these young ones? To Sarnie here. If they learn to read and write. And write, it's just grief for them. Long time grief. They find what they don't have, can't have. It ain't good to know that. It eats at you then, to know it and not have it. They have to be able to write, John said, voice pushing. He stood and reached out one hand with long fingers and touched Mammy on the forehead. It was almost like he'd be kissing her with his fingers. Soft. Touch like black cotton in the dark. They have to read and write. We all have to read and write so we can write about this, what they doing to us. It has to be written. Mammy, she turned and went back to her mat on the floor, moving quiet, not looking back. She settled next to the young ones, and John, he turned to me, and he say, next is C. So, that is chapters 3 and chapters 4. These were a little bit longer than some of the other ones. Or, well, I guess than the first two. But to kind of quickly recap, I have some questions here that I'm going to answer. So, Sarni, in the beginning of chapter 3, she said that old Waller brought him in bad. Sarni, in that case, is referring to Nightjohn, and the reason that she's saying that is because he had so many whips and scars. His back was full of scars all the way from the top of his shoulders down his legs. So they knew that he was trouble, right? People or slaves that have lots of whip marks don't want to be bought because they are trouble. They're hard to work. And that's why he paid so much for him. Why do you think he paid so much? We still really haven't gotten to that. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. So the next question, describe what Nightjohn offered to trade in return for Sarni's tobacco and why was he trading it? So again, Nightjohn is trading letters, trading the alphabet, trading reading and writing for Sarni's tobacco, and that tobacco is just acting as a form of exchange, like money. So that's all Sarni has. That's what she has to offer, and she wants to learn to read, so she is paying for that reading through tobacco. And Nightjohn wants to teach her, because what we just read in chapter 4, he wants to teach her and teach others to read and to write, to make sure that they are documenting their experiences, and people like us today or people throughout history can read about them and understand the pain and the suffering and the hurt that they went through. And as a history teacher also, that's really important, because without those documentations, those primary sources coming directly from the person, we wouldn't know what they went through or what they experienced, not from their own perspective. So it is really important that he is trying to teach them to read and to write. Why did Mammy warn Sarni to stay away from reading and writing, and what was her motive? So basically, Mammy did not want Sarni to learn to read and to write, because if she did, the overseers or Waller, he would whip her, he would cut off her thumbs, he would punish her, and Mammy did not want Sarni to end up like Alice, that slave who was a little off in the head, and then they forced her to breed, so essentially raping. And then she was all messed up, and she tried to run and got whipped, and there was just no going back for her. She was broken. And Mammy does not want that to happen to Sarni. Mammy's essentially Sarni's mother. Maybe not by blood, but she raised her, and she does not want to see those things happen to Sarni. She's trying to protect her. So this next question is more of an opinion question, but why do you think Nightjohn was willing to teach Sarni to read despite the risk to both of them? And in my opinion, it was just, I believe that he's trying to teach Sarni to read because he feels that this is going to help them, or maybe the future of slavery, end. If people can really understand the experiences that they're going through, or really read about them and empathize with them or sympathize with them a little bit, he's hoping that slavery is going to end one day and they won't be treated like this forever. But if they don't write about it, they don't read or tell other people about it, he thinks they'll be stuck in the same situation forever. Maybe not just him, but the next African Americans and the people, the children that are being born to these plantations, and their children and their children. He wants it to end for them, for future generations down the road. Okay. Let me go to chapter 4 questions. So Sarni says it's wrong to run. Now, she doesn't mean that it's wrong to run like she doesn't want to. She's saying it's wrong to run because she's seen what can happen to these slaves. And the reason that Waller and other plantation owners whip the slaves in front of the others is to teach them a lesson on not doing these things, not running away, not wandering too close to the White House like Alice did, not doing anything to upset them, because if they do, this is what's going to happen. And it's just a scare tactic to try to teach the other slaves not to follow in those same footsteps. So Sarni doesn't necessarily believe it's wrong, but she knows it's wrong because she's going to get whipped for it. And she doesn't want that to happen. And why did Nightjohn come back from the north after he escaped? So remember, Nightjohn in chapter 4 was able to escape slavery. However, he returned to do his teachings of the reading and the writing because he feels that it's valuable to tell their story. Again, like I said before, valuable to tell their story so that hopefully down the road, slavery as an institution will end and generations of slaves won't have to go through the same things that they're going through right now. Okay, I feel like that's pretty good. I'm looking through the questions here, and I feel like we've hit on a lot of the main points. So hopefully these chapters enlightened you a little bit into the story, and you can come up with a good discussion response to the question on Canvas, as well as giving some detail and some thought into the diary entry writing assignment from Mammy's perspective. If you have any questions on anything, please just ask me, email me, ask me in a video chat during my office hours, whatever. Just make sure that you're reaching out and really trying your best to do these assignments. So I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.